Should have had my intro. Ready? All right, good evening, everybody. Yeah, thanks for coming. And my name is Tony, Tony Pujols. I work at Accelerator in Mountain View, and been working with Node for the past few years. I guess since about 2010. Love Node. I assume you guys are all here because you have an interest in Node, and I'm going to talk tonight a little bit. This is a very beginner level intro to Express. My goal is to, you're not going to walk out here knowing everything you need to know about Express. You won't be ready to build any fancy websites just yet. This is basically a quick intro to demystify probably some of the pain points for people who are jumping into Express development. And I can definitely remember some of the pain points I had when I started. So, you know, what is Express? Well, Express is a very minimal, unopinionated framework that sits on top of the Node HTTP module. And when I say thin and lightweight, it really is. Most of the interesting stuff that ends up getting done with Express happens because of middleware that you include. But Express has a bit of intelligence and comes with a generator that can help you get some scaffolding off the ground. So it's pretty nice. Those of you coming from Ruby, well, it's, as it says, a little bit more like Sinatra. So a little less opinion. If you're looking for more opinion, if you're looking for more structure, you may want to take a look at Kraken from PayPal, which wraps Express and then provides a little more structure to your apps. So it's not the only web framework. There's also, for example, Happy from Walmart, but it has the saving grace of being the dominant one. It's definitely the one that most people go to or most people are familiar. It's been around the longest, and it is lightweight and it is fairly unopinionated, and these are all good things. With Express 4.0, they cleaned it out even more. They removed the dependency on directly requiring Connect, which was another framework, although it's compatible with all the Connect middleware that's out there. And what does all that stuff mean? Well, I'll get into it. As you guys all know, the goal of a web server framework is to help you take care of your HTTP response request cycle. And what Express is going to do is it's going to provide this very lightweight wrapper on top of the core HTTP module that's built into, that comes with Node. That's part of the core Node platform. I'm actually going to go into some code and start there in just a second, but just to give you a preview, this is as simple as it can be. The reason why I'm doing this is a lot of times people look at these Express apps that have been generated auto-generated using the CLI, and there's already a whole bunch of stuff in there. All the middleware has been added, all the scaffolding, the routes and the views and everything else, and you're like, holy crap, where do I start? Is this necessary? It's hard sometimes to figure out what you can actually take out of it. And a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are going to be taking a look at Express as a great way of building APIs. If you're building a single page app, it's a great solution. You can serve your web page out of your static directory, and you can call back to your APIs. So you don't really need all of that junk that gets created for you when you scaffold your app. And this is as lightweight as you can get. And we'll actually dive into code in just a minute. I think I kind of talked about this already. It wraps the HTTP server out of core Node. And a lot of this stuff got pulled out of another presentation I had done, so I'm going to actually pass on all this. And actually, I'm going to go right into code. So let's do that. So I've got this GitHub repo up there on my GitHub account called Express Beginner, I think. Oh, I guess I call it Express Demo. You can find it, Express Demo, and all of this stuff is up there. along with a few little notes on what each one of the lessons means. Okay, and we'll walk through that. So if you were just going to use core Node and no framework, you would start off doing something like this. And you can go to the Node homepage and you'll see an example almost identical to this. This is a core Node module, so I don't really have to do anything. It comes with the Node platform. I don't even need to package out JSON. I don't have to npm install any modules. Everything I need is right there. So I'm going to get my HTTP module. I'm going to create a listener function. When I create my server, I need to provide a listen function. The very first listen event is going to call this function back and execute the code that's inside of this function right here. So I'm going to call HTTP create server. I'm going to get back this app. I'm going to tell the app to start listening on a specific port, and internet address. And at that point, when I get any request, the code that's inside of here is going to execute. And let's, for anybody who's curious, if you're not familiar with it, I'm using JetBrains Webstorm. I normally, I like VI, I like Sublime, but I find that Webstorm is great for showing people it's cross-platform, so it runs on Windows, Linux, Mac, and you can do everything without it, and there's options for debugging and all kinds of stuff without Webstorm, but it turns out it's a pretty good tool with a really good debugger. So I'm going to go ahead and run this app. It tells me I'm listening on port 3000. And of course, as you'd expect, there's your hello world. So pretty straightforward, pretty basic. I could have, I didn't want to have this as a callback right inside my create server call, just so I could make it really clear. But let's take this and say, okay, if I can do this with the HTTP module, well, that's not so complicated. I created a server, and I can handle, I can get a request, I can send out a response. And let's take a look at if you wanted to build a web server that actually could read from the file system. So I'm going to need my HTTP module again. I'm going to also need FS for file system. For convenience, I'm going to go ahead and use path. I'm going to create another server again. And then what I'm going to do inside of my listen function, which I've just created here anonymously, I'm going to take a look at the incoming request, and if it matches a specific pattern, root or / index.html, I'm going to then go ahead and try and read that file from the file system. If the server has a problem, I'll go ahead and return a 500. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and return my result, which will be a 200. Okay. I'll set the content type to text HTML. I'll write out my response. Now, if it didn't match this pattern, then I'll go ahead and I'll send a 404. Not found. I'll start listening. So let's go ahead and go here. Okay, so it worked. It found my hello world index.html, and I also could have said index.html. Now, so the problem with this approach, and I've got some notes in here, is this is fine and dandy, but a web framework is designed to actually do a lot more than just help you load a file off the file system. And if you're going to do all the work yourself, you would be doing a lot of work. A couple of bullet points here. We should be able to support multiple MIME types, multiple formats, both for the requests as well as the responses, content negotiation, all that kind of stuff. We should be flexible about loading our resources. This one was hard coded, and there's no templating or anything like that right now. We definitely want to not buffer that whole file into memory. That was a small little file, but we keep loading it each and every time, so we didn't cache it, and we're not streaming it. There's no support for URL, query parameter support, no cookie support, nothing. So as you can kind of imagine, yeah, you can use the core HTTP module, but there'd be a lot of work that you'd have to start doing yourself. So, Express to the rescue. So let's take a look at what it's going to look like to start using Express. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to assume that most of you are familiar with how to install a Node module, as well as assume you're familiar with JavaScript and HTTP in this little demo here. I'm not going to go over all the basics, but I'll definitely take some questions and provide a little more help afterwards. But I have installed Express. I did an npm install Express, saved it, so it's also available here inside of package.json as one of my dependencies. So in my code here, I'm going to require it. I'll require the Express module, and creating my app is as simple as calling the Express function that I got back. And this is, I'm going to go ahead and set my port to the port environment variable that I supply this process, or if nothing is there, then default to 3000. And if you look here, I've got this function that's going to handle requests and provide responses. And this is actually the very first example that you're going to see of using an Express middleware. And it's this simple. In other words, I'm not actually looking for any specific request yet on any specific route or for any type of resource. I've got this generic function right now that will always be here in the request response pipeline. It's a middleware. And the way you can write one single monolithic function that can handle every request that comes in, look at headers, do content negotiation, whatever it is you want to do, find files from the operating system, provide API, database query results, and some certain transformations on the back end, XML, JSON, whatever is requested, but and then handle security, and all of that kind of stuff. But those are separate concerns, and those are handled really well by middleware, which are basically functions that daisy chain. Now, I'm not showing how to daisy chain it here yet in this example. I'll get that in the next one. So we're just going to install this single middleware function that's going to take a request and provide a response. We're telling our Express app to use this middleware. When a request comes in, it's going to call back to our function. It's going to provide it the request and response objects that we get to use. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and write out. I'll set my header 200. Okay. Set the content type and close my response with some data. And oops, wrong one. All right, I'm listening on port 3000. And the interesting thing is, it actually doesn't matter what's there, because this is a middleware function that will respond to any request. Doesn't matter at all. Got it? Okay, because this was basically, this listens to every single request coming in. And in this case, I made a decision to go ahead and end it. I didn't daisy chain to any other middleware. And I definitely didn't handle it in a more specific case. So stop me if this doesn't make sense so far. But I've got a single middleware function. It closes the request as soon as it handles it. It doesn't call any other requests. And so it's going to basically respond to anything. And if that doesn't make sense, let me know. So let's go on to the next example then. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate actually using a few middleware. I'm going to go ahead and use a pretty nice one for logging all your requests called Morgan, which you npm install Morgan and then you require it in your app. I'll go ahead and create another middleware function. And I'm trying to remember what I was doing. Oh, yeah. So it's going to look, and if you happen to be coming in on, I mean, this is just a dumb example, but if you're coming in on a specific route and it matches test, it's going to go ahead and enable test mode. You can imagine that it might be doing something else, setting compression, whatever it is you need to have handle. I'm going to add middleware then to send a hello world response, which is basically what we saw before. But if we're in test mode, instead of sending the hello world, I'm actually going to go ahead and serve the request headers back to the client. So you can see what the request header said. So it returns hello world as we expect, and I think it'll return hello world for any reason. Ta-da. And what we should see also out here in our output is that our logging middleware, Morgan, is logging all of our requests, okay? And if I go ahead and now hit it on this very specific route that it's looking for, it set my test mode variable to true. And so in this middleware function, I went ahead and returned the request headers instead of returning hello world. How's everybody so far? Everybody with me? Pretty simple, straightforward at this point. You guys are smart. It's usually... All right. Finally, we're going to get to an example that uses a very popular and common middleware. And this particular middleware is the Express static middleware that lets you serve files from the file system. The example is basically similar to the previous one in the sense that we're using Morgan. We're going to use the static middleware. And by the way, keep in mind that these functions don't expect to stop that chain. So they're all invoking next. The definitions of these functions are basically calling next. That's why the pipeline's working. Until we get to the and they're invoked in order. So the order that you add your middleware to your app is the order that they're going to be invoked, which is why the last one, mine, is the one that will go ahead and end the response. So we got Morgan for logging. We got express.static so that we can serve our, what I want to be our public directory. And by default, since I haven't specified a specific path, it's going to serve my public directory at root for the URL, the URL root. So here's my public directory, and in there I got my index.html. And on my request, I'm basically going to return nothing is here if I get this far. And I guess, I'm sorry, I made a mistake when I said something earlier. Morgan, the logging one, doesn't expect to ever stop. I mean, it's going to invoke next. Static is actually going to end the response if it in fact finds the file that you requested in the directory that it's exposing. So if it finds a file, we end here. If it doesn't, then we fall through to this case, which is where I'll end it saying, hey, there was nothing here for you. So let's go ahead and run this example. Hello. Nothing here for you. Morgan worked. Morgan was logging. But if I specifically request a file that I know exists on my file system, then Express will serve it up. And there you go. There's Hello World, which was in my public directory. So again, Express static is a piece of is middleware, and its job is to serve files from your file system. Very common. You're going to use a lot. Each one of these directories, by the way, also has a README. So if you need to figure out what's in the directory, this one is. Yeah. The point of this one is to basically return now. Okay, I showed you middleware, and but you're not normally going to handle requests from middleware. The job of middleware, as I mentioned, is to handle those kind of cross-cutting concerns. You want to make sure you got logging. You want to take care of authentication. You want to do all this stuff for every single request coming in, and you want this pipeline of functions to happen. But when you want to handle specific requests, you're normally going to handle those with, via your HTTP verbs, your get, your post, put, delete, that kind of stuff. And so on your Express app, you provide the HTTP verb that you want to handle, as well as the route that you want to handle, and you give it the a function callback. All right. So for app get on root, we'll go ahead and print out hello world. Oops. You guys know these are going to work, so I don't even know why I bother. But so, very simple example. Let's take a look at something a little bit that does a little bit more. It's a steady progression here in terms of complexity. All I'm showing you here is, in this example, you saw me print out that I started the server after this, but in fact, this is actually going to happen. It's going to happen very quickly, but in fact, if you want to do something exactly when it's done and ready for listening, by providing this callback function, you've actually registered for the listen event. And that's, it's going to call you when it's actually done and ready to be listening. So the only difference between this and the previous example is that I actually used a callback to wait till I'm listening. Okay, and I'm getting my warning. I got to go a little bit faster, so I'm going to go faster at this point. Please hold questions till the end. I also returned the server object, and you can look at my notes, but and you can follow the links to understand what HTTP server, which is basically a net server, what that brings to the table in terms of properties and methods. Let's go real fast. Oh, that was that one. This example just shows you that in addition to providing the port, you can provide the host name, and I'll provide a link here so you can go and find more details about the things you can do. Very simple, very straightforward. So with Express, it's pretty easy to configure. Okay, in this particular example, I'm handling 3 different routes. No magic here. This is going to work exactly as you'd expect. I'm going to get something different when I hit each route. And in this example, what I'm doing is I'm actually showing you how Express will handle content negotiation for you automatically in a number of cases. But in some cases, you're going to have to manually specify what your content type is that you're returning here. So, for example, if it sees something that looks like HTML, it's going to return. It's going to set the response header for text HTML. All right. If it looks like a plain string, nope, it's not smart enough. You've got to tell it that it's text plain. If it if you create a buffer, it's going to return it as an application octet stream, which is, so, and if I run this, it thinks it's binary that needed to be downloaded. If I return something that looks like JSON, it's automatically going to set application JSON. If I return an array, it's going to set application JSON. If I return, again, this is XML, but it would think that it was HTML. So you've got to be explicit and tell it it's XML. So good to know. So you got some control over what you're returning from your various APIs. Now, in this example, okay, this example is a little bit more complicated. How much time do I have, Jimmy? 5 minutes? Okay. This example is a little bit more complicated, but I wanted to demonstrate actually a full CRUD example of creating some data, updating it, deleting it, both as a simple example and then a one that shows how easy it is to throw Mongo into there. But in this case, I need another piece of middleware called body parser so that when I post data, I can parse my request body. I am going to, so I'm setting again my logging middleware. I'm setting the body parser JSON because I'm expecting to be posting JSON to my APIs. So I will get users, and in that case, I will return a JSON response. And very simple. This is very naive. It just always succeeds, and it's going to return success and provide users in the users property, which is just a simple array that starts off with one person. And if I and this was an example where I was going to show you. I use curl all the time, but I know that's sometimes, or I don't know about the audience, and some of you guys are Windows guys. So there's this cool Chrome extension called Postman that makes it really easy to the get query is easy, obviously, but post, input, and delete, and all that kind of stuff, all your verbs. So if I do a get on my URL, it returns true. File one, there was one user, me, and return that. Now, if I look for a specific user, this is the syntax for specifying that I've got this parameter as part, route parameter that I want to use. And here's request params.name. Name is what this will be mapped to. So I've said I've got a route parameter called name, which I indicate with the colon. It will automatically be added here. I've assigned it to name. I look in my array to see if I find it. I'm using underscore. And then I'm going to return, if it found it, true, otherwise not found. So true, false. Okay. Now, I'm not here to set policy. I mean, you guys, you can determine whether it should be a 404 versus, hey, it's a request that succeeded, but the user wasn't in there. That's a implementation detail. You guys, you can interpolate. For posting, I'm expecting that when I post data to this route, it'll be part of request body, and some simple validation. I'm going to make sure it's not empty and that there's a name. Make sure it's not, doesn't already exist. And if I pass all of these, cases here, then I'll go ahead and save the data, and I'll return success with my user with the ID field set. And so if I post set, it's expecting JSON. Okay, and Sally. And true, Sally is there. And I can also do a get on users, and again, I can see that Sally's there. Put works the same way, guys. Put, I'm expecting to find the resource, make sure the resource is actually there. If it's there, I'm going to update that resource. Delete, same thing. I'm going to make sure that the resource is there and then remove it. Route parameters is one way. Query parameters is the other way. Another way. And of course, you've got on post, you've got body parameters. I could have used a query parameter, and it would have looked like this: name equals request query name. Or Express gives you this nice simple helper function called param, where you can put in name, and it's actually going to search in this order. It's going to look to see if it's in a query parameter or a route parameter or a body parameter, and find it for you. Lesson 10 is the exact same thing, but demonstrating it with Mongo. Now, this is not a demonstration of best practices Mongo. This Mongo's right here. Oops, mixing with the API, but I only handle a couple of simple cases. You get the idea. But the idea was that I make sure I can connect to Mongo, and then if we connect to Mongo, then I go ahead and start listening, and then I provide my route handlers for getting users and for getting a specific user. And as you can see, connected to Mongo, and then it starts listening. And that works. Now, what I haven't covered is building web pages. So when you use the Express generator, you're going to get something that will scaffold your pages, and it looks like this. You install your Express generator, and then you run Express. So sorry, forgetting something in my notes, or I'm missing something in the notes that I should have showed you. But anyway, if you ran Express to and gave it a name, you're going to then switch into the Express directory that got created, run npm install, so all the dependencies are added, start it, and it's going to start running by default on port 3000. What are you going to get? You're going to get something that looks like this. A lot of stuff in here for you. All right, and dissecting this, you're going to see that you've got, you're going to have routes that have been created for you, views that are going to be created for you. If you've got a classic MVC style app that you want to build. If you favor building a single page app, then you're not going to need any of that stuff. You will be using static middleware to expose your to serve your web page, and then it'll be calling back your APIs. But otherwise, you've got a few choices for your templating options. By default, it's going to create a Jade view template. Otherwise, you can specify EGS, Hogan, and there are a few others, but you'll have to do that manually. It's going to build a bunch of code for you. It's going to create a bin folder with www, which is what you're going to run, and you're going to take a look. It's going to have created the app router for you. It'll have included a whole bunch of middleware by default. It will set up some basic routes. It'll provide some functions for you to handle routes that don't match, some special handling if you're running in the dev environment, and it will then set up your views. And all of that stuff is for the next session, but I hope that I was able to demystify a little bit about Express and maybe simplify what it takes to get up and running with Express. But any questions from anyone? And I know that was a really whirlwind tour of Express. Yeah?
Sorry, this is going to be a very opinion-based question, so
yeah.
Don't be. I'm asking for your opinion on this. Recently, I proposed building something with Express, and the person said, well, Express is too heavyweight. We must use Restify for it. And I was wondering, do you think that perception comes from the difference between Express 3 and Express 4?
I think in part, and I think when people think about the fact that it's got support for a view engine, all of that kind of stuff, I think so. We use both Express and we also use Restify at Appcelerator. There used to be, and I don't know, and you know what they say about benchmarks anyway, and I don't know the current benchmarks. Restify used to have performance issues, and also had some size limit, connection limitations. I don't know if that's true anymore. It was probably a while, at least a year ago, that I was aware of those issues. I know that Restify's goal was to be very precise and correct and specifically handle APIs without any extra stuff. But in my opinion, it's rare that you start out and think, man, I'm only going to serve APIs, and then you find out that, gosh, I wish I had some middleware that would handle this. I wish I could do this with my requests or do that. Express supports so much, and it is lightweight. You saw how lightweight that it was. If you do an npm install Express, it's tiny. It really is not much more than a few wrappers around handling that request response cycle and injecting any middleware packages that you choose to use. But because it's so standard and so many people work with it, and because it supports so many middleware packages, and all the concerns that come along with that, I find it a really, I find that you would have to really know what you wanted to have this really compelling argument to go pick something besides Express. And if you're there, then great. But you're not going to go wrong by picking Express. And I don't know what the statistics are, but I would say that the majority of people out there who have built APIs on Node, they started with Express. So, and we've got some pretty big size, pretty heavy APIs that are hit pretty heavy, and they're all Express backed. So I don't think you'll regret your choice to go with Express. But that being said, I don't think Restify is a bad choice either. If you think there's even the slightest chance you may want to do, serve any UI, and it's, then you may regret not going with Express. And you really want to do your homework on all those middleware packages that are out there. Start with taking a look at what is available via Connect, because Express is all Connect compatible. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Koa?
Well, okay, so that if you buy off on the idea that you want to use generators and you want to use Ko, then for your generators, then Koa certainly makes sense. I personally have not felt strongly compelled to go either the generator or the promises route, because I haven't been willing to give up some of the performance for the syntactic sugar that they provide, and I don't find the callback model hard at all to work with, and I don't find it hard to leverage libraries like async that help me manage some of the complexity of dealing with complex orchestrated activities. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with Koa and Ko or promises. I just haven't found a compelling need myself to go that route. But all right, I think I'm out of time. The hook is coming, the gong. All right, thanks.